The ROG Ally X is on paper a much improved gaming handheld in comparison to the original ROG Ally, which launched over a year ago. But all those improvements come with a steep price of $800. So how much do these improvements really matter in practice? And is the Ally X worth its premium asking price? Let's find out. The first thing I noticed when I unboxed the ROG Ally X is its brand new shell that now comes in black. However, the new shell, despite its similar appearance to the original, is actually very different. It's much thicker now to fit its new battery. However, I did notice that it still fits in my original ROG Ally case that was sent to me from TumTuk. Link in the description if you are interested in getting one. Inside the box is the same 60-watt charger, but keep in mind the Ally X supports up to 100 watts charging. But we also have a new redesigned stand for the ROG Ally X that's now split into two pieces, and to be honest, I like this a lot more. But as for the device itself, it's noticeably heavier, but not necessarily a bad thing from my perspective, as I have said in my MSI Claw video that the extra heft made it feel a bit more premium. And in fact, its larger size and more rounded grips make the Ally X much more ergonomic and comfortable to hold in comparison to the original. Another key difference is the newly designed D-pad for the Ally X. The new D-pad is bigger, matte coated, and has a new design. It also feels a bit better to use, but don't take my word for it because I really don't use the D-pad very often. But what really caught my eye was the new joysticks. The new joysticks are a massive improvement compared to the original. The thumbsticks now contour to your thumbs and feel tighter and more precise to use. They are so much better than the original Ally and resolve one of my biggest issues with it. On the backside of the Ally X are new back buttons which are now much smaller, clickier, and more responsive. Similarly, the face buttons also received a bit of an upgrade and are now much more responsive. And to match the larger size of the Ally X, they made the triggers a bit wider. They also upgraded the RGB rings around the joysticks as well. On top of the Ally X, they added an extra vent and a new fan system underneath with thinner fan blades that are much quieter and much more efficient. They also completely resolved the micro SD card problems that plagued many ROG Ally owners. At least I think they did. I haven't had any problems with it personally, and I don't think anyone else has reported it yet. There are also a few other minor things that they have changed, like the fingerprint reader is now concave for some reason, and if you look close at the grip on the back of the device, you will see it's actually made up of tiny little ROG lettering, which is very similar to what PlayStation did with printing the button icons on the DualSense controllers and PS5 accessories. But what really sets these devices apart is what's underneath, in which the ROG Ally X has some noteworthy improvements. The Ally X has 24 gigabytes of 7500 megahertz LPDDR5X RAM compared to the 16 gigabytes of 6400 megahertz RAM in the original Ally. The Ally X also has an 80 watt hour battery, which is 2 times the size of the 40 watt hour battery in the OG Ally, which when I reviewed it was the worst battery out of all the handhelds that I've reviewed. You can check that video out here if you are interested in watching it. The Ally X is also equipped with a 1TB SSD, which is now a full-size 2280 M.2 SSD, which can be swapped with a much bigger SSD going up to 8TB. This SSD is the same size as the one that comes in your PS5 or your desktop computer, so they are on sale regularly. The original Ally used the smaller 2230 SSD, which has a max capacity of 2TB if I'm not mistaken. So if you really wanted to, you can make the Ally X your main gaming rig and keep every game you own on here. Speaking of making this your main gaming rig, the Ally X now supports just about any external GPU, as it now has 2 USB-C ports on the top, one of which now supports DisplayPort 1.4 and Power Delivery 3.0. On the original Ally, you were limited to Asus's XG Mobile eGPU. The XG Mobile GPUs were all laptop GPUs, which are quite a bit weaker, so a laptop 4090 for $1999 was a little insane. The display on the Ally X, however, is the exact same as the original Ally, but I actually think the display is great, and most importantly, or more disappointingly, the APU is also the exact same. However, the extra RAM and new upgraded 80 watt hour battery allows you to take more advantage of the APU in portable mode. In fact, the default mode is now set to 17 watts versus the 15 watts that it was set to on the original. But the ROG Ally X has the best battery life out of all of the handhelds I've reviewed, including the Steam Deck OLED, which I stated in my review of it is that its battery life should be a selling point of the device, and the same can be said here. But now let's discuss the gaming performance of the Asus ROG Ally X. I'm not going to get too technical into benchmarks, but I will do a few comparisons using the same settings in 3 games using the 25-watt profile. Keep in mind, as I said earlier, that there's only a difference in speed and quantity of RAM between the 2 devices. I have set the Ally X to 8GB of RAM and the Ally Original to 6GB of dedicated RAM to the GPU. With that said, the first game up is Cyberpunk 2077. So for this benchmark, I am using the Steam Deck default preset, except for some reason when I was recording the benchmark on the ROG Ally X, I only got 5 FPS average, which I initially believed to be a bad driver update or some bug, which really wouldn't be surprising considering, Cyberpunk's known for its bugs. That is until I saw at the end of my benchmark that it was actually running in RT overdrive mode, which includes path tracing. Yeah, I don't think that should have been turned on. So just for fun, I also checked if it could run in RT overdrive mode on the OG Ally, and it turns out it actually can. However, it averaged around 4 FPS, so very slightly lower. But now let's actually talk about the real benchmarks. On the Ally X, Cyberpunk 2077 got an average of 45.44 FPS versus on the Ally, which averaged 42 FPS. Very marginal difference here, which was to be expected. So now let's take a look at Red Dead Redemption 2. In the Red Dead Redemption 2 in-game benchmark, with the suggested settings directly from Asus, the Ally X averaged an FPS of 49.3 and the original Ally averaged 44.9 FPS. So the Ally X does again show some improvement, although not very noticeable. But the extra RAM speed is probably the cause of the increase in FPS here if I had to guess. In Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, with recommended settings set to performance, the Ally averaged 108 FPS versus 100 FPS on the original Ally. And once again, there is an improvement, although not a very significant one, which is about what I expected considering the Z1 Extreme is identical in both devices. But I did observe one more thing about the RAM which I thought was a bit interesting. I accidentally set my Ally X to 12GB of dedicated RAM for the GPU, but with 12GB of VRAM, I noticed that it actually decreased performance slightly in the games I tested. In Cyberpunk 2077, it got an average 43.6 FPS versus 45.44 FPS with the 8GB VRAM setting. In Red Dead 2, it averaged a 46.9 FPS versus 49.3 FPS with 8GB setting as well. In Call of Duty, it averaged 105 FPS with 12GB versus 108 FPS with 8GB. So it seems like having a complete 16GB of RAM dedicated to the CPU is just as valuable as having more RAM dedicated to the GPU. But obviously, this will vary depending on what settings you use and what game you are playing. The improvements overall may be small in performance, but the larger battery will still let you get more performance out of the Ally X on the go compared to the Ally, which will die much quicker at 25 watts. So that is something to keep in mind unless you primarily play plugged in at home. But unfortunately, despite all the improvements, I still have a few issues with the ROG Ally X. The ROG Ally X still runs Windows. All right, hold on a second here, guys. We gotta pause the video. I mean, don't actually pause the video. Don't actually pause the video. We're going to talk here for a second about something really cool. So I'm updating this video from the future because Valve just announced today that they are going to have a port of SteamOS that will work with the ROG Ally, Ally X, and other rival Windows handhelds, which is really cool because this adds a lot more value to me for the ROG Ally X because I was about to talk about why I don't like Windows on the ROG Ally X or any Windows handheld for that matter. Having the option to choose between the two is a big deal to me. And I want to say that I can't really knock it any points anymore for running Windows. So yeah, this is great news and I'm looking forward to checking this out whenever it happens. All right, back to the video. But for some reason, I noticed something that was strangely worse on the ROG Ally X than on the original Ally, and that is the speakers. I'm not sure why, but the speakers sound much more quiet and muffled. I tried updating the drivers and software, changing Dolby Atmos settings, and nothing could fix it. Just have a listen here.
To love what I'm doing, never give up, never slow till I finally prove it. Never listen to the no's, I just wanna keep moving. Keep my head up when I act, head up, that's a fact. Thing I know is to love what I'm doing, never give up, never slow till I finally prove it. Never listen to the no's, I just wanna keep moving. Keep my head up when I act, head up, that's a fact.
The Ally X also still lacks Hall effect joysticks, so that means that these joysticks will still drift despite Asus's claims of being more durable. And lastly, the Ally X's price point is also out of a lot of people's budgets at $800, especially considering you can get roughly the same performance for much cheaper. But that's about it for my critiques. Overall though, the Asus ROG Ally X is a big improvement over the original ROG Ally in many ways. The better build quality, the improved joysticks, the 2 USB-C ports with external GPU support, the larger SSD storage, the improved battery life, and the other improvements I've mentioned here in this video make this device feel like it's a next-gen handheld. Except, I'm constantly reminded that it's not. The ROG Ally X is still at its core an original ROG Ally, but much more refined. The X on the end of its name represents extra RAM, extra battery life, extra storage, extra comfort, extra build quality, and extra premium. But it doesn't stand for extra power, because well, in most games as we've observed, you won't see any noticeable improvements over the original. So if that's the case, who is the ROG Ally X even for? Well, I believe it's for someone who wants the most uncompromised handheld experience possible no matter the price point. This is definitely an enthusiast device at this price point because at $550 you can get an ROG Ally on sale, and yes, it is a worse experience in some regards, but it depends on what you value the most in your handheld. If you value the improvements we've discussed here in this video enough, go get the Ally X over the original. But personally, if I wasn't making this video, I would wait until it goes on sale or for the next model. I just recently bought my ROG Ally original on sale for $550, and I also recognize that it's very likely that a more powerful ROG Ally will launch in 2025 that will build upon what the Ally X laid the foundation for. That will be the true successor. But to be honest, that shouldn't stop you from buying the Ally X if you really want one right now, because there's always going to be something better on the way, and the Ally X is nonetheless a damn good handheld. But that's going to do it for today's video. If you found this video informative, leave a like and subscribe for more handheld reviews and tech related videos. Also, you might as well hit that little bell to be the first to know when my next video comes out, as I will be covering as many of these devices as I can and more. This has been KillerCam1020. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one. Peace.